you're surprised I've made it this far, as I've said in other videos. Same. Today's video, we are going to be talking about the Woodbridge abductions, also known as the story of the East Coast Rapist. Now, get yourselves nice and comfortable. Grab yourselves a nice coffee, tea, get cozy in a blanket, or join me again for a glass of wine. Might as well finish this off. Cheers. That was a huge sip. What was I thinking? Our story begins in Prince George County, Maryland. County borders the eastern edge such attack was on a 35-year-old woman who had just gotten off a bus near a new townhome community. The rapist approached her pretending to be lost. He then put her into a headlock and led her to a nearby wooded area while brandishing a knife. What the rapist didn't know was that the victim was in the military and had hand-to-hand combat training. Good. She was able to wrestle the 6-inch serrated knife away from him. When she tried to stab him, he claimed he was just joking and took off running. This knife was linked to the man who would become known as the East Coast Rapist. DNA from his skin cells was taken from the knife and matched previous victims. This also was the only known item that the East Coast Rapist had left behind at any of the crime scenes to this point. In May of 2001, Leesburg, Virginia, the East Coast Rapist had struck once again, this time in an apartment complex where he grabbed a woman from behind, wrapping his arms around her. The woman thought that it was her husband and had actually laughed, but when she looked down and saw the arms, she'd realized quickly that it was not him. The man had told her to shut up or that he would kill her with his knife. The 41-year-old woman at the time had been walking back and forth from her apartment to her car as she was in the process of moving, and it was around 5 p.m. that she had sent her son off to his taekwondo lessons. When she'd finished up moving, while she had been down at her car, the rapist had taken the opportunity to enter the nearly empty apartment. When the victim had returned, he'd pushed her onto the bedroom floor. What the victim saw was not a knife, but an orange-handled Phillips head screwdriver. To change up his attack, the rapist used shoelaces he had brought with him. Again, shades of kind of the East Side Rapist, aka Golden State Killer. These often do get confused, but they're not the same people. And he had tied her hands over her head. The rapist then covered the victim's face with her shirt while being raped. The victim tried to notify her downstairs neighbor by banging her foot against the floor. She remembered that on occasions when she had been running on her treadmill, that the neighbor had complained of the noise, but sadly this time he did not complain. The victim didn't give up on trying to get him to stop. She told him that she was having trouble breathing, but once he moved the shirt from her face, he threatened again, telling her not to tell the police because he lived right across the hall. As the rapist had done on previous occasions, he also complimented the victim, telling her she was fine. Once the attack was over, the East Coast Rapist gathered up the victim's clothes, shoes, and cell phone, along with shoelaces and the screwdriver that he had brought, and he ran off. The victim was left naked and terrified. The victim didn't stay down long and ran to a nearby window, yelling to the neighbors to call 911. When the police arrived, they found the victim in the only thing she could find in her apartment: Christmas wrapping paper. Several days after Christmas in 2001, a 29-year-old woman was running late for work. She'd quickly gotten dressed and rushed to the nearby bus stop in Alexandria, Virginia. While she waited, she'd notice a man smoking a cigarette alone along the tree line. She thought he was just being polite and standing away from her while he was smoking. But once she had finished, he approached her, asking when the next bus might arrive. He then told her that he had a weapon and to follow him. She was able she was up and running back to her place to shower. Her husband fortunately convinced her not to shower and to contact the police, and police were able to recover DNA that linked this victim to the East Coast Rapist. This is terrible. This is so gross. In August, the East Coast Rapist would strike again, this time becoming bolder in his approach and his attacks. He had chosen 2 victims at once this time, both teenage girls who were walking home from Marlow Heights Shopping Center near the Washington Beltway when a man had pulled a gun on them. He'd forced them into a wooded area and then raped the both of them. While investigators were actively trying to find the man that was responsible, there had been no attacks for over 4 years in Fairfax, Virginia. Police did not know if the East Coast Rapist had been doing jail time. Maybe he was serving in the military, decided to lie low, or just simply stop on his own. But that did not seem to be the case. In November of 2006 in Cranston, Rhode Island, about 400 miles from Virginia, an 11-year-old girl, was in her living room doing homework when she'd seen a man trying to unlock the sliding glass door. The man was able to get the door slightly open when the girl had screamed. Thank God, and the family's dog, a Great Dane, had barked and scared off the man. Oh, okay, thank God. Okay, sorry. I'm getting really creeped out. The young girl's mom told the police that she had just gotten home from work and perhaps the man was thinking that she was alone. The police would find 3 drops of semen outside of the sliding glass door. That's pretty rough. The East Coast Rapist was then on the move. The mother seemed to think there that she might have been the victim, or the target, but based on that information, I'm gonna drink because I don't want to remember that. Okay. At 1 a.m. on January 10th of 2007, a 27-year-old woman is asleep in her New Haven Con bedroom with her 11-month-old son sleeping soundly in the The U.S. Marshal Service had been keeping an eye on that residence based upon a tip that had come in from the digital billboards asking for more information on the East Coast Rapist. There was also a website, eastcoastrapist.com. Investigators had got 44,000 hits in the first 12 hours of the billboard going live. Billboards with pictures of various sketches taken over the years were up in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, and Virginia, where the East Coast Rapists had attacked. They were also up in New Jersey, New York, and Delaware. So, the residence that Marshall and the investigators were looking into was a 39-year-old Aaron H. Thomas, an unemployed truck driver. He had been living in New Haven since 2005. Investigators had followed Thomas for a few days. They'd even followed him to a court hearing for a previous larceny charge. Aaron H. Thomas was then smoking a cigarette outside of the courthouse, which he then discarded. Guess what had happened next? Investigators carefully collected the butt and submitted it immediately for DNA testing, after confirming that the DNA belonged to the man who had long been known as the East Coast Rapist. Aaron H. Thomas was taken into custody by the U.S. Marshal Service. Upon his arrest, he told authorities that they'd had the right man and asked why they hadn't picked him up sooner. They'd notified other jurisdictions of his arrest, and hours after Aaron H. Thomas had been arrested, he had attempted to hang himself in his jail cell, but was not successful. So, although Thomas's father was a high-ranking member of the Washington, D.C. police, he did not act like an outstanding citizen at home. He would make Aaron suffer for years of physically abusing him, and Aaron actually got in trouble at a young age for some very serious offenses, or at least some that should be concerning to a parent. He was known for torturing animals in his neighborhood, and one time had given his brother a sleeping pill just to see what would happen. Thomas would end up spending approximately 3 years in a treatment center during high school, but his father ended up committing suicide. After high school, Thomas was kicked out of his home and ended up living on the streets. He says that it was at this point that there was something within him he could not control, and that he had to give in to his animalistic urges. Thomas was 19 to 20 years old at the time that he'd committed his first rape. He would claim after his arrest that he didn't feel his attacks were violent, and that all he did was find a woman and scare her into giving him sex. And the very definition of rape is non-consensual sex. So, anyway, he admitted to going out and scouting locations that would be hidden enough to carry out these rapes. Aaron H. Thomas also claimed that once he started raping women, that it felt too good to stop. He admitted that he was able to go long periods of sentence, hearing that Thomas was a sexual deviant. Aaron H. Thomas had admitted that over the years he had purposefully changed his appearance to avoid looking too similar to the sketches that were put out of him. He would also watch for any coverages of rapes that he'd committed and stop raping women in certain counties for fear of being caught. Finally, he claimed that he was glad he was caught, but only saw himself as being somewhat of a predator. Yeah, that's a lot. So I know that there is so much to that story, and that it was so much more than just Halloween. But when I was looking up cases for around this time, and I'd read that one, I just thought it was a case that I definitely should, dive into. And it is pretty disgusting, honestly. This guy is he's nasty. That's for sure. I'd actually never heard this story before until looking into, Halloween, true crime, and this popped up, and as soon as I read it, I was like, I know it's a larger case, but we definitely need to get into it. I'm sure you guys have, but had you heard of this case before? Please leave any comments below on your thoughts of this video, this true crime story. I'd actually never heard of him. I only did vaguely when I was researching the Golden State Killer, because, even rereading this, I had moments where I was like, these sound like the same people, very similar in certain ways, both monsters, honestly, but definitely different in their own ways, that's for sure. So anyway, you got Angel, trick-or-treater, when I was young here. And I hope that, although a very heavy and terrifying story,